So when we talk about adding responsibilities to the current role, I have experience with it. And it doesn't necessarily come in the size of taking on responsibilities that your boss is doing, although that could be the case for some. In my case, I found by looking around the company and seeing areas that I may have a certain skill set in was much more appealing to me. So taking on a responsibility in another area that also helps the company and it enhances my role at the same time. But a few things, you can't, I'm not talking about, hey, I have some extra time, would you like me to do that for you? That doesn't really count at the end of the day for us. We're putting ourselves out there, we're doing something outside of our box, but it's really just almost kind of like a favor. And I'm talking about taking that to another level. But in order to do that, you need to have buy-in from several pieces of the corporate structure if you want it to really end up to be something that appears as part of your job description. It's on your KPI when you do your reviews, so it's part of the rating that you receive, part of the monetary result of that, perhaps raise, in other words, bonus. Make it really a part of your overall position. It's not just, hey, I have some extra time, let me do that for you. Certainly doing those things leading up to achieving this can't hurt, because you're showing your skill set voluntarily and helping out somebody. That's a great trait, and we should all do that as EAs when we can. But when we're talking about moving that needle and enhancing our role, bringing on new responsibilities, there's a few things that I have put together as a kind of a bullet point, starting point that needs to take place in order to start moving toward that, moving toward your company being open to that, moving toward your leadership team being open to that. It starts with a conversation. I'm interested in doing this. Are we open to this happening? Starting with your boss. I have an interest in corporate communications. Would it be okay if I perhaps talk to them about taking on some tasks or projects? That's the kind of conversation where you're kind of opening up that door and seeing if they're gonna bite. So a lot of what I'm talking about will work for many and not for others, and I understand that. This is something that I was able to achieve. It was in a big global company, and I've always been able to pick up some extra role, if you will, that was a little bit outside of what I do, because I always wanted to make it interesting, and I always wanted to see other parts of the company. So it makes me a better assistant to my boss, because I'm kind of seeing what's going on out there in his overall world, because in most cases I was working for the head of the company, so I was able to get a peek into other things to enhance my role, and therefore be better for him. So conversation. I also have coaching on there, and I'll just talk briefly about that, but it certainly can help the executive assistant, and I would love to see more companies moving in that direction, where they do spend a lot of money on very fancy coaches for their executive team, yet the person that's sitting outside that executive's office goes without coaching. And I think the investment that a company would make in a coach for the executive assistants would be game changing. I've seen it. Awareness of the stigma and stereotypes. So, we don't hear it as much anymore. We have moved the needle a bit on that stigma of just an assistant, secretary, that our roles are calendar, expenses, and travel. There's so much more, and we know that, but that doesn't always help if only we know that. So we need to educate people and really stamp out that stigma. And I think we've done such a great job showing how critical we are to a corporate structure. We're still here, right? So that means something. And that conversation has to continue, and the education has to continue. Oftentimes, if somebody says just a, I ask them to remove the word just. She's an executive assistant, not just he or she. Training is also key to enhancing our roles, allowing us to add responsibilities. So that can come in all different shapes and sizes. There should be a training budget for the EAs. Oftentimes they're not, and that will come in my next slide, where what is HR doing to support the EA? I was, somewhat surprised to find at my last place of employment, when I would ask to go on conferences, what's the budget? They would always say, there's not really a budget, but let us know what the conference is, and I'm sure we'll approve it with the right business case provided, which I always did. I'd rather see that there's a budget, so I can do a plan if I can go to 3 conferences a year, and I think that's fair. And it's easily achieved, and it's just probably something they're not doing because nobody ever asked. So training is very important. Invite to the table. Now that is something that I think is key. Are we getting invited to the table? And that table could come in many shapes and sizes. I often think the executive assistant or a supporting role is not always invited to sit on certain committees. And a perfect example, once when I was at the last company I worked for, the global tech company, they developed a Women at Work program, and I was very excited about that, and I wanted to be part of it. However, I was able to be part of the Women at Work program and represent our office in the U.S. whenever there were, and head up events, bring in speakers. I came up with a lot of creative ways that we could meet and discuss how it is, being a woman at work in a tech company. But they formed a steering committee, and I wanted to be invited to that table. I thought it was important that the steering committee is not made up of just the leaders, the women leaders, that they have a more rounded committee, and that would include somebody from the support staff. So I made a case for that, and they wholeheartedly agreed, and I was able to sit on the steering committee as the only executive assistant for the Women at Work committee. So that's what I mean about getting invited to the table. Sometimes they're not even thinking about, oh, we should include the executive assistant. And it's important, and it will help them more than they realize. So you could always suggest that. Feedback is important, and what I mean by that is just kind of getting feedback from various leaders within your company about their perception of the EA role, and just kind of put it out there to see if there's any pushback on the role itself being enhanced in some way, shape, or form, whether that be added responsibilities, taking on tasks from another area of the company, just to kind of make them a more rounded employee as they're supporting a C-suite. Just feedback. What are you hearing around the office about the EA? It's helpful information when you're forming up some sort of plan to kind of shine the light on your own role. The recognize and award programs are very key. At first I thought, I don't need to get an award for doing my job, because I would pull off these amazing, international trips that got, moved a bunch of executives from one country to another country and gathered them successfully, and everyone had a hotel room and everyone's car was there to pick them up, and everything went smooth because I followed up, because that's my job. But oftentimes I would get a recognition through our award program, and it meant a lot to me. And these are great things to have when you're maybe looking for a job someday. All these online applications are asking any awards or recognitions? Well, sure, I put that all in there. I've gotten recognized many times for my work. So these award programs mean something, and if your company doesn't have one, there's so many different ones out there, and it's easy to adapt to, and it's a great suggestion that you can make and look good for bringing something that's going to make all employees' lives maybe more motivated, inspired, because they're being recognized. And create a forum. This is one of my main things that I want for executive assistants is forums, and we have so many, as you all know, but within your own organization, especially if you're a global company and you create a forum, and it doesn't have to be this thing where you meet and go out to lunch, although that's nice, but it more of a digital platform where you guys can meet and share ideas and share travel tips. And my boss is going to London, and the EA in London can within 2 minutes give all the information that would normally take you 2 hours to get. So creating forums among us is so key. The culture of the company is also going to be very key to achieving that ability to having the company be open to this taking on new responsibilities. Because like I was talking about earlier, we don't want it to be, hey, I'm gonna give you a hand today because I have some free time. Again, whenever you can do that, I think it's a great thing, and it just and it enhances who we are as an employee, and it brings value to somebody else. So it's never a bad thing to do. But when I'm talking about taking on a new responsibility, I want it to be recognized. And in order to do that, you can't just say, well, I want it to be recognized. People have to buy into it. And it can't be just for me because I had the big idea. So it needs to be floated by the leadership team. How do they view the role of the executive assistant would be one thing we need to find out. And there are companies that are so progressive and so advanced in that area, we could skip right over that. And how fortunate for those executive assistants, but others it's going to be a boulder up the hill. So first we have to find out what their take on this is. And I remember when I was doing this at the last company, creating this culture so we could be more recognized and have more benefits to enhancing our role in the company. I had suggested that we all take a trip, once a year. The leadership team met quarterly all around the world at various places on the globe, and that I suggested just one of those once a year, that all the EAs also meet, and we have our own agenda. And the eyes were rolling from the HR person, and I was just, I felt very defeated at that point because I need buy-in from that person. And I had a talk with him afterwards and tried to explain to him how that made me feel as far as how he was perceiving the role of the EA, and that we have a long way to go. And he was talking about the financial part of it and all that, and I said, well, the return on investment for having us meet in person just once a year, you'll get the money back, trust me, in time and in how we feel about our jobs, and that the company is looking at us in such a bright light that they're allowing us to have this annual gathering so we can exchange ideas and help each other. The investment was nothing compared to what they were going to get back, and he was able to see it my way eventually. So human resources, again, how are they supporting the role? They're going to be a very big buy-in to this because, again, when you take on a task that's outside of your regular duties, you're going to want it to be recognized in your job description, that it appears on your KPIs, the things that you have to, the goals you have to meet. This task must be on there as well. And, does your manager utilize you beyond calendar, travel, and expenses? What is he or she currently doing that you could probably do more of? Again, I'm talking about specifically adding responsibilities outside of your current role, but there's also ways you can partner with your own boss on certain things. And, you know, I shouldn't say I never did that. Of course, I did more than calendar travel and expenses. He had a chief of staff, so to speak. He was a vice president, but the way his role was more like a chief of staff in the executive sense. I know a lot of executive assistants take on that title as well, and I think that's super cool. But there is definitely a difference, I believe, in some chief of staffs. And if you need more information on that, or disagree or agree, you can see that when you go look at actual chief of staff job descriptions that are for, you know, the MBA that is going to be groomed to eventually roll into a leadership role. And, you know, that's great if some of you want to do that. I'm not interested in doing that, but the role of the of this particular person, I aligned myself very closely with him when I was working for my boss, because we were two of the people that worked with my boss the most, and I felt collaborating together would really help me help my boss. I can't come up with anything specific that I did with this particular person, but I definitely was taking on more important and significant projects by working with this other right hand of my bosses. So most of our executives probably do have a right hand, and they want a relationship with us as much as we do with them. And together, I think if they have an open mind to what more we can actually do, it's worth having a conversation with them. The team is their collaboration and support among the EA team. And this is important too, because when I took on this role of this outside of my regular duties, I didn't want it to be just something that I was doing, because that could cause stuff in the office. Oh, why is she doing that? So I shared this with the team and let them know that I was doing this, and others were taking it on as well, and they thought it was a very appealing way to make their job a little more exciting rather than be frustrated and leave the company in some cases. Some were able to find that passion they had and take on something from another role and enhance their own role, therefore enhance their experience. So it saves jobs. It's just a win-win. I really, really believe that. And then finally us, the EA, how are we playing a role in all of these things above? And it's really important that we are connecting the dots for all of these pieces to what we need to get where we want to go. So my clear-cut example of how I made this work for me, I have several, but I'll give a couple. When I worked at the BBC, I worked for the president, and he, because it was television, intern program was very popular, and he would always get an intern. And so I would have the intern, come to me, and I would guide the intern. But there was not much that they were able to do to really get an idea of what goes on in the world of television by being the intern in the president's office. So I set up an intern program where they would rotate with other interns. So we had an opportunity to bring in more than one. And they would go from department to department to department. And I know that's not an original idea, but we weren't doing that there. And this gave the intern a much more rounded experience, even though they were so excited to be working for this president, because he was very well known in the television industry. They were really just helping me. Not that that's a minuscule task. However, it wasn't giving them a real picture of television. So that became very successful. And I still hear from some of those interns today that have gone on to be very successful in the television world. So it was very rewarding for me as well. I also, at the last company I was with, that's where I really made this work, and where I came up with these pieces of the puzzle that need to come together. so that this was a real thing. I've always wanted to work in corporate communications, but I love working for the C-suite. So, and because they work very closely together, I was very familiar with corporate comms and what they did. And I had such a passion for it, it became very natural to me. So whenever they needed something, I was a very good liaise between my boss and them and what they needed. So my ask was that I take on projects from the corporate comms department. I did that by making myself known, letting them see what I'm all about, letting them know that I'm very capable of doing corporate comms projects. And lo and behold, they put me in charge of, or working on the internal comms newsletter, which was a very popular publication digitally. I was involved with procuring stories, coming up with ideas for stories, highlighting employees and such. And I was very good at it, and I loved it, and it just made me feel so good about my job. It really, really did. So even so, I did it so well, the head of internal comms had to go on maternity leave, and they put me in charge of the newsletter. So temporarily I was the boss and of the newsletter, and it was really exciting. And all the while I'm doing my job, and this was always done with the disclaimer that my allegiance was to my executive, and that should this become overwhelming, that the extra job would need to go, and I would resume my role with my boss. And that never had to happen. I was able to balance it all out because I wanted it to work. So that's my example of ways that you can add to your responsibilities by doing other things within the company. They didn't have to hire somebody when the person went out on maternity leave. I saved them that. It made me feel good, so I wasn't getting tired and bored and thinking I needed to move on to another job somewhere else. It was a really positive situation, and like I said, everyone bought in. It wasn't like a secret, and I was, rated on my performance, and it was part of my review. And it's now on my resume that I have experience in corporate communications. So it was a really great thing to do, and I highly recommend it for you guys.